There is a great comic book movie called Batman Returns that was both commercially successful and in some ways not. Today, let's talk about the challenges the Batman sequel faced and figure out why audiences didn't like the movie, eventually leading to Batman and Robin, whose failure robbed us of the chance to see the greatest comic book blockbuster in film history. In 1988, after several Superman movies, many in Hollywood believed that making comic book films was a waste of time, and definitely not something you could make real money on. The only ones who refused to believe that were Warner Brothers, the very studio behind all those epic films about the man in tights and red underwear. Still, they gave Batman a much smaller budget than Superman. While Superman had a $55 million budget in 1978, Batman only got $35 million in 1989. Moreover, the director of Batman wasn't exactly a big name back then, and the role of Bruce Wayne went to a not-so-well-known actor. Trying to give their film at least a fighting chance, the studio brought in Jack Nicholson. Since no one wanted to star in comic book movies at the time, they paid him a fortune. The actor's fee, which included a share of the box office, remained the largest in Hollywood history until The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions hit theaters. After the Wachowskis movies, Nicholson was dethroned by Keanu Reeves, who was paid around $125 million for his role. But even that wasn't enough for Jack. He had an endless list of privileges on set. Nicholson's contract required him to follow a very strict schedule. Since the actor loved attending various Hollywood parties, he'd show up on set later than everyone else, then sit down in a chair and fall asleep. While Nicholson peacefully rested, makeup artists would swarm around him, applying layers of makeup. Around noon, he'd wake up and shoot until evening. After that, he'd leave for another event, and filming would continue without him. Later, the talented actor admitted that this role was one of his favorites. According to Jack Nicholson, he liked his performance so much that when the movie was released on video, he would watch it once a week to admire his own genius. The $100 million he earned in royalties over the next 30 years probably made that love for the movie grow even stronger. The actress for the role of Vicky Vale was cast just a week before filming began. The producers and director Tim Burton claimed that Kim Basinger had always been their first choice for the role. They wanted to meet with her and discuss it, but her agent turned them down, insisting on negotiating the fee first. Believing that Kim Basinger wasn't a big enough star to throw money at, the producers turned to Sean Young. Young agreed to take the role, but during a rehearsal before filming, she fell off a horse and broke her collarbone. After that, the producers reached out to Basinger's agent again, this time with a generous offer. By the way, the horse scene that forced Sean Young to leave the project was eventually cut from the script by Tim Burton. Shaken by what had happened to her, the director decided to scrap the scene to make sure Kim didn't fall off the horse too. While the film was still in production, everyone was predicting it would flop. The press only wrote about it in a negative light. To change public opinion, Warner rushed out a 90-second trailer for the unfinished movie and released it in US theaters. They picked one cinema in California to test it. That's where the unsuspecting audience saw the trailer for the first time. The reaction was explosive. The audience burst into applause. Later, many theaters reported that some people were buying tickets for other films just to see the Batman trailer, then leaving right after. When Batman hit theaters in June 1989, it became the highest-grossing film of the year in the US. Globally, however, it only came in second, with Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade taking the top spot. Following such massive success, the studio immediately announced plans for a sequel, a threequel, a spin-off, and a TV show. And that's when the problems began. Back in the day, Tim Burton openly admitted in interviews that he didn't really like Batman. While he thought it had some good scenes, overall he found the film boring. Still, when Warner decided they wanted a sequel, they were willing to do anything to bring Burton back. While Nicholson enjoyed all the perks on the first Batman, it was Tim Burton who took over on Batman Returns. It's believed that the creative control Burton had on the second Batman was unmatched until years later, when Christopher Nolan secured similar control for The Dark Knight Rises. But it was that very control that eventually caused Burton to part ways with Batman. While Tim Burton was refusing to direct the sequel and working on Edward Scissorhands, the studio was developing a script for a direct continuation of the first Batman. Stylistically, the film was supposed to look exactly the same. The main villains were the Penguin and Catwoman. Plus, there was a crazy Santa Claus with an AK-47. Batman was supposed to remain the main character, with lots of screen time devoted to him and his relationship with Vicky Vale, a role Kim Basinger was set to reprise. The Penguin was just a minor villain, searching for billions of dollars hidden somewhere. But after Burton finished Edward Scissorhands, he began to ease up, and was no longer so opposed to returning as director. The studio immediately took advantage of this, and Burton negotiated a fantastic deal for himself, including an impressive paycheck. He didn't forget about Michael Keaton either. The actor demanded $11 million to return. The studio tried to push back, but Burton threatened to leave the project and insisted Keaton deserved that kind of money. As soon as Burton was given full control, he brought in Heather's screenwriter Daniel Waters. Together, they almost completely rewrote the script by Sam Hamm. While some might think a movie featuring psychopaths with AK-47s and gangsters chasing treasure would have been better, that's probably not the case, especially considering the treasure, by pure coincidence, was supposed to be buried right in the middle of the Batcave. Not to mention, Robin was written as a 12-year-old schoolboy with kung fu skills. Burton scrapped all that right away, although traces of Robin still remained in the script. Marlon Wayans was supposed to play him in the third film. He was also set to appear in Batman Returns as a mechanic. The actor even had a costume fitting, but in the end, Burton removed all mentions of the character from the script. Burton didn't like the Penguin either. In interviews, he said he just couldn't understand what was so interesting about a generic gangster with a cigar. Still, he couldn't get rid of the Penguin or Catwoman, so in the end, the Penguin was turned into a tragic freak. But that wasn't the only problem with the character. For a long time, the creators couldn't come up with a proper evil plan for him. At one point, the studio even suggested an idea where the Penguin would try to freeze the entire city. This undeniably great idea, rejected by Burton, still made its way to us in Batman and Robin. All these delays, along with the skyrocketing fees of Burton and Keaton, began to seriously inflate the budget of the new Batman. On top of that, Burton refused to use the sets from the first movie, which the studio had carefully stored for 2 years, paying $250,000 a year. It all had to be scrapped and rebuilt from scratch. The casting of the female lead didn't go smoothly either. For a long time, Annette Bening was attached to the project, but just before filming began, she became pregnant and had to drop out. The role was then offered to Jodie Foster, who immediately turned it down. After that, Burton had to fend off Sean Young, who tried to force her way into Burton's office screaming. Rumor has it she managed to break down his door, but Burton hid under his desk, and it never crossed Young's mind to check there. Only after all that did the role finally go to Michelle Pfeiffer, who also received the biggest paycheck of her career at the time. If you add up the money paid to all the actors and the director, you'll find that a third of the budget for the second Batman ended up in the pockets of a small group of talented individuals. But remembering how well the first movie did at the box office, the studio spared no expense and quickly fulfilled all of Burton's demands. There was nothing particularly remarkable about the actual filming, except that 50% of Warner's facilities were dedicated to this one movie. Tim Burton occupied half of the studio's sound stages. Warner guarded the set 24/7. They went all out to keep the film a secret. They even refused entry to Kevin Costner, who once tried to get onto the set. Perhaps that was a mistake, considering Costner was a big box office draw back then. When a photo of Danny DeVito as the Penguin leaked to the press, the studio hired several private investigators to track down the source. There's no official information about how things ended. The film's advertising expenses also got out of control. Warner ended up spending much more than they had planned. The problem was that people kept taking down the Catwoman posters from the streets. They'd get replaced only to disappear again the next day across the country. Eventually, police in many American cities were ordered to change their patrol routes to include more bus stops and billboards that people kept breaking and destroying to get posters of Michelle Pfeiffer. Among other things, the film initially received an R rating. To get rid of it, the studio had to cut a few scenes the rating boards found too explicit and provocative. However, after the premiere, the film still faced criticism from family audiences. People complained about the excessive darkness, Catwoman's costume, and the Penguin's creepy look. Thanks to the first Batman and the posters featuring Michelle Pfeiffer, Batman Returns was the most anticipated film of 1992. The movie had a great opening weekend. It grossed $47 million in U.S. theaters, setting a new record. That record was broken a year later by Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. However, after the opening weekend, the film's box office began to decline worldwide. Audiences didn't like the obvious shift toward campiness and were disappointed by how different the film was from the first Batman. Eventually, opinions changed and the film gained nearly the same level of appreciation as the first one. Still, back in 1992, the studio was extremely disappointed. With a budget of $80 million, Batman Returns grossed $266 million. That wasn't bad, but the first Batman, which cost $35 million, grossed $411 million. That's why the third film, which Burton also planned to direct, was never made. This time, the studio wasn't going to give the director full creative freedom. While Tim Burton was in charge of the third Batman, Michael Keaton was set to play the lead, and the main female role belonged to Rene Russo. But when Burton and Keaton left the project and Val Kilmer came on board, the studio replaced Russo because she was 6 years older than Kilmer. In an interview, Burton confessed that as long as he was in charge, nobody would have used the title Batman Forever. According to him, he can't stand titles like that. They seem more fitting for a tattoo. Burton also wanted the film to have only one villain, the Riddler. Two-Face was introduced into the plot only after Burton left and Joel Schumacher took over as director. Michael Keaton said that even after the studio and Tim Burton failed to agree on the direction of the franchise, he was still willing to play Batman. Everything changed when Joel Schumacher joined the project. Keaton noticed the film was turning into some kind of silly cartoon. He couldn't accept that, so he dropped out. However, there are other rumors suggesting that Warner simply didn't want to pay the $15 million Keaton demanded. Val Kilmer was willing to do the role for only $7 million. As a result, Warner robbed us of a truly unique Batman trilogy. Some might say that Burton was to blame too, and that the creator needed someone strict to keep him in check. But looking at Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, which followed Burton's second film, it's hard to blame him. If the box office hadn't dropped off so badly, we probably would have gotten a Catwoman movie as well. Burton had no plans to bring her back in his films, but the studio insisted on adding her in the film's finale during post-production. That scene was filmed without Michelle Pfeiffer, who was unavailable at the time. Since Warner's enthusiasm faded after Batman Returns' earnings, Michelle left the franchise a few years later. That's how we ended up with what we have now. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.